Murat Ucoglu, who's doing his PhD in the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University.
I will show you some photos that were taken by me and by some of my students in Istanbul. So, 2 weeks ago, Loic Vacan was in Istanbul to make a speech on the commemoration day of Grand Prix, and he claimed that Gezi movement was made up of people from the middle classes, because according to him, only middle classes can form the public sphere in neoliberal world, since lower classes and working classes have already been eliminated by neoliberal practices. In 2011, I proposed a course syllabus to the Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Bahçeşehir University in Istanbul. The name of the course was Globalization in Istanbul. The dean was reluctant to accept the syllabus in the beginning, since she was thinking that the course would not be very interesting for the students of the university. However, in the interview, I insisted by saying that there is an ongoing transformation process in Istanbul. People from lower classes and working classes are already aware of this transformation because they are now experiencing this issue. However, young people and essentially university students should also learn the theoretical approaches on this issue. So after my insistence, she accepted the proposal. I designed the course around the concept of the right to the city in order to illustrate how neoliberalism is shaping Istanbul through a conservative and authoritarian urban regime under the discourse of creating a global city or a global financial center. I wanted to show my students the importance of their democratic rights pertaining to their everyday lives in the city. Then many of my students, then many of my students went to the first attempt of resistance in Gezi Park in April 2013. Urban activists, students, and opponents of AKP's urban regime came together in Gezi Park on the 13th of April for attracting the attention of people for protecting the park, where AKP's regime, as we mentioned, wanted to build a shopping mall in the form of a destroyed Ottoman military barrack. So in the same moments, the documentary of Imre Azam, called Ecumenopolis, the city without borders, became very popular in Turkey. The documentary shows the resistance and struggle of displaced people. Therefore, people strongly realized that displaced people from lower classes and from the margins of society were already struggling for protecting their right to the city. However, the authoritarian aura of AKP regime and the attitude of corporate media prevented many people to know about these issues. Actually, many people in Turkey were not aware of the problems of urban gentrification. So, in the last decade, Istanbul became a place of endless construction. AKP's neoliberal regime is constructed on 3 crucial mechanisms. So the first one is the economical perspective, and my colleagues explained that perspective very well. The second one is the increase of police violence for creating a new authoritarian regime to impede all kinds of protests. The final one is the discourse of conservatism, which is shaped by a so-called imagination of Ottomanist nostalgia. This regime formed an urban policy based on overwhelming gentrification projects that displaced lower classes, minorities, informal immigrants, and transgender people who were living very close to central districts of the city. Those people were displaced by the policies of credit debt, mass housing, and police violence. The districts of Tarlabaşı, Sulukule, Çubuk, and Ayazma were the main places of urban gentrification in Istanbul. So on the other side of the spectrum, AKP's regime uses a rhetoric of neo-Ottomanism which aims to increase the conservative tendencies for creating the concept for displacing people by arguing that those people are generally some sexual workers and ethnic terrorist groups. So this rhetoric also includes the reformation of the city center in accordance with so-called Ottoman architecture and lifestyle. The cafes, pubs, and restaurants in Taksim prevented to put table outside of their places. Drinking alcohol could not be displayed publicly. So this neo-Ottomanist rhetoric created a kind of competition between Ottoman Istanbul and Republican Istanbul. This competition also included AKP's foreign policy of engendering an influence area in the post-Ottoman geography. City center was reorganized with enormous number of hotels appealing to Middle Eastern rich tourists, and many historical buildings were destroyed, for building shopping malls and hotels. Many public places that were built in the modernization period of Turkey were destroyed, and some of them were converted into shopping malls. Public spaces were destroyed day by day, and people in Istanbul enclosed by shopping malls, mega projects, gentrification projects, and destruction of historical places. So, after the necessary effort of some urban scholars, artists, and activists in Istanbul, a kind of consciousness for protecting the urban life started in 2010 and 11. The historical train station Haydarpaşa was built somehow and now will be a part of urban renewal project. Another historical building in Beyoğlu, Taksim, a movie theater, which had a special place in the memory of the city, was destructed in order to build a shopping mall. These events also took the attraction of people and essentially of artists and intellectuals. The announcement of several mega projects, like building 2 new cities in the North Forest of Istanbul, the North Forest of Istanbul, constructing the 3rd bridge on Bosphorus Strait and the so-called world's largest airport in Istanbul, and unfortunately the attempt to build a new canal between Black Sea and Marmara Sea, which was presented by Prime Minister as a crazy project. The canal was planned as an alternative to Bosphorus Strait. Therefore, a process of deforestation started in Istanbul, and northern forests are now systematically being destroyed by AKP regime. It was the last attempt of AKP to destroy the only green area left in Taksim. This attempt of destroying the most crucial part in the city center perceived a final threshold by people for saying enough to this greedy urban regime. This resistance, as I said before, first started in mid-April. However, the big Gezi Park resistance began on May 28 as an action to protect the last remaining green area in city center and spread like wildfire across the country. After the spread of resistance across the country, a brutal police violence started, and people who witnessed this violence started to participate to this movement. The park was captured by the resistors on the 1st of June, and the resistance continued in other parts of the city and country. So this resistance created its own rhetoric, political practices, and consciousness of solidarity. Many persons from very different social origins, educational background, and ethnic background came together in order to reclaim the city and protect their right to the city. Right to the city became one of the most crucial mottos of this resistance. People began to understand the importance of their democratic rights in their everyday life and in urban decision-making process. This is the first time people from almost all kinds of social origins in Turkey came together to resist against a conservative government. The authoritarian language of Erdogan and the brutal police violence and spoiling the historical beauties of Istanbul created this resistance. People from middle classes, working classes, students, and essential displaced people due to gentrification projects came together in Gezi Park and created a new culture of solidarity and freedom of expression for 2 weeks. The police could not enter to the park for 2 weeks, and people enjoyed the meaning of freedom during this time. It was also my best time in Istanbul throughout my life. So, as a consequence, I would like to say that Gezi resistance wasn't an isolated movement of middle classes, it was an attempt of all classes to protect their right to the city. On the other hand, it was also a turning point, since middle classes realized the pain and difficulties that displaced people have been experiencing since 2006. Now, it is not easy for AKP regime to build a mega project in the city center, since people realize that they can protect their rights. David Harvey's latest book, Rebel Cities, which includes his article, The Right to the City, became a bestseller in Turkey, and so has Noam Chomsky's Occupy. So, Bahçeşehir University became one of the central places of resistance as well. And so what I learned from the resistance as a lesson is that if we have necessary conditions for creating the consciousness of protecting democratic urban rights, we can create more democratic and open urban politics against the greed of neoliberalism. Thank you.
Pelin Asci from geography at York University, also she's doing her PhD there.
Ah, okay. Yes. Okay. So My presentation is on graffiti as a method of resistance that were used in Gezi protests to mobilize the crowds. And just like my friend Murat mentioned, like I borrow from Henry Lefebvre to use the concept of right to city, how graffiti as a means can be a method to appropriate space, to produce space, like make it a space where not only the capital produce, but the inhabitants, us, live, produce, working too. So I want to start my presentation with this graffiti from Gezi Park, Taksim Square, because I think it really fits into how graffiti and Gezi spirit reflects each other. First, what's a graffiti? Like, it's not something someone's bedroom or in a living room, but it's something in a public space, that somewhere that is not meant to be, on a public wall, in a shopper's gate. And second, it's canvas. Oh, sorry. Yes, that was the first thing. Yes, and the second thing, its canvas is always illegal, illegitimate. It's access where it's not supposed to be access. And I think this is just like Gezi and Gezi spirit. Like, those people were not supposed to be in that park. They were not supposed to protest at Taksim Square, but protest some at demarcated areas in the peripheries of the city. So I think in this sense, like, graffiti and Gezi is like an act of defiance for borders that are imposed on us by the system. And I think like everyone has read it. So it's like it says it's dangerous and forbidden to enter the construction zone. But sorry, Tayyip Erdogan, we have already entered there. So I gathered some like graffiti examples from like both Istanbul and other cities, and I put them under like themes. This one, like ridiculing the leader, was one of the most dominant ones, where like protesters took Erdogan's statements and turned them on the flip, firing it back. Tayyip, winter is coming is always like a warning. You know, your days are limited, and you banned alcohol, and now everybody has sobered up. Is referred to his like conservative policies and referring to the recent alcohol ban in Turkey. And at least 3 beers refers to his instant on like everyone should produce at least 3 children so that we can have cheap labor and we can continue grow as a city and country. I think these things are important because like it's not easy to ridicule Erdogan in Turkey. You can find yourself at a courtroom suddenly without knowing it. So I think it was like important for the movement to delegitimize the leader and the state, and also like blur the boundaries between the top, those who tell us to what to do, and those at the bottom who are supposed to listen all the time. Another famous example, maybe some of you are familiar with this, but I couldn't help to mention it. So during the protest, Erdogan called protesters çapulcu, which means looters in Turkish. And instead of being upset and offended, protesters actually embraced this word, and it became a really proud thing to be a çapulcu. And like today, if you look at Wikipedia or like Urban Dictionary, you will see that çapulink means to resist state oppression, fight for democracy. And I remember the day I saw when I saw this graffiti on Twitter. It was circulated a lot, and I felt so cool and so proud that even though like you're tired, you just want to go and çapul tomorrow again. So I think it's also important to like how graffiti and humor can mobilize people and create a collective sense of being. Yes, that's just. And another theme was the mocking the police brutality. Like there was excessive use of tear gas, plastic bullets, water cannons. So it was like it was definitely the most comfortable and safest days to be on the streets. But you want to stay on the streets. So what do? Like, okay, you get your mask from your home, you get your lemon, you get your milk, depending on which gas they may spray on you, so you want to be protected. But what else can you do? You can mock the brutality itself and mock the police. And so like the one on the left says, we haven't taken a shower for the last 3 days, send us water cannons. And while on the right is like, we got so used to discuss Tayyip and the smiley face. I think this is like very important, and connects to Lefebvre as well. How can we represent our urban space? At this point, I think it's important to remember, like, it's on the July 11th, the governor of Istanbul explicitly stated that, calling on parents, like, pick up your kids from the streets. We don't guarantee their lives anymore. So that's like a very interesting and striking point for me. As a state, you give up on like protecting people's life, one of your major duties, and why? To spread fear, so that people withdraw from the streets and go to back their home. So I think again, like humor and like graffiti may change how we see places and how it may challenge the dominant representations, and most importantly, it may like encourage us to stay on the streets. And another important like graffiti that we saw on the streets was the murals of the protesters who were murdered by the police. Abdullah is a 22 years old. Was a 22 years old student who was hit by on his head by a tear gas canister, and Ali was 19 years old when he was beaten to death by police and also by some civilians in the street where he was protesting in Eskişehir. So when I look at these pictures, or when I saw them at streets, I feel like it puts a different gaze into our urban space, a different gaze than the surveillance camera at a shopping mall, a gaze that remembers what has happened, make us remind what has happened, and asking for like maybe for their justice. So in that sense, I think it also like injects kind of history into our collective memory, like through graffiti, that the state doesn't want you to remember, or state wants you to forget. So it may be like spaces of remember too. And like to wrap up, what may like connecting to public space, the graffiti itself can be a discussion board. That's what's good about graffiti. Like it's not written there once and then stays there permanently, but it can be deleted, repainted, or at least becomes a base of debate. Here, especially in the initial days of the protest, there were very sexist language within the graffiti, like attacking women and LGBT members. So, like after some like workshops at the Gezi Park, feminist organizations were gathered, and they walked through the streets of Istanbul, and they have painted the sexist graffitis with blue color, and then wrote like, the graffiti has been removed because of its sexist content. So it doesn't just stay there, but it also like inflicts a discussion. And this is also like another example, and is one of my favorites. So there was this like slogan of "We are the soldiers of Mustafa Kemal," who is the founder of Republic. So it's like it has very like conservative and nationalist and militaristic connotations, like referring to the coup d'etats happened in the West, and it's like very exclusive for Kurdish people who were also part of the movement. So in opposition to that, there was this like graffiti of like, we are no one's soldiers, but also like better than that, we are the soldiers of Mustafa Kemal, who is the guy you see there, a folklore Turkish singer. So he was basically chosen just because of the similarity of linguistics, and there he explains on a TV channel why some people claim to be his soldiers. And for those who are curious, he said that he thinks he was chosen because he's both religious and both knows how to have fun. So, going back to Lefebvre and wrapping it up all at a public space, I want to finish with this graffiti. It's like the development project was also a pedestrianization project of Taksim Square. As it says, like it's already pedestrianized, not by the shopping mall or not by the construction, but because there were so many flows of people that cars and like vehicles couldn't move. So I think like looking at this, it reminds us how humor and graffiti can be ways to appropriate urban space by inserting a different kind of memory that state wants us to forget, or by basically physically occupying the wall that is meant to be commodified for a shopping mall. So that's all. Thank you very much.
And finally, we'll have concluding comments by Agathangelou, who's a professor in political science at York University.
So I wanted to begin first with, I was grappling with this because I was trying to think, okay, do we want to think about this question of the global context first, and how that really has led to what has happened at Gezi? But I felt like the presentations were so rich in a way that they are allowing us to think maybe to put pressure on a little bit on a unified and homogeneous global. So I want to begin with that because as we have, Yashin started first of all with the question of was this a working class movement, and I guess, if you're coming from a particular vantage point, the immediate response is yes, but then that's a very limiting way of answering that kind of question because as we have heard both from Murat and also I think Pelin, and also Asci, it was much more complicated. There were other people there that in some ways may not identify themselves just as working class, but they were part of the protest. So I just want to leave that with us to think about who were the subjects that constituted this movement itself. So the other thing that I would like us, that came up very intensely here is the question of like neoliberalism or what I want to call neoliberal projects, but at the same time the question of political agendas, and the third question was also like values. What kinds of values were really kind of reinserted or articulated through this contestation? So I'm just going to leave that there, and then I will just give a few points that I was thinking as the speakers were speaking. So my big question was, what was this big obsession of Erdogan of having a shopping mall at Gezi? And what was Gezi, of course, is very important, or the Taksim Square around the question of military barracks. And also the other thing is there, he wanted to build a mosque as well. So these three kinds of spaces in a way, but within a public space that was already a public space and understood as such. And I want to complicate the question of nature. I think it was Asci who brought that, because in a way already it was parks are always associated with public spaces. But of course when we kind of unpack a little bit that space, what we know a lot about Taksim Square and Gezi Park, it has a much more complicated history and nuanced history that really brings us back to a different genealogy that Erdogan wanted to really basically capture, or really basically steal from people's lives in such a way in order to articulate his Ottomanist agenda. And of course, as some of, you know better than me, but it kind of reminded me, the first thing that it reminded me of was asking a question, what was the space before? Before it became even a park. And of course, as some of you know, this space is located within an Armenian graveyard. So even the stairs that made the Gezi Park, they were, basically the stones of the graveyard of Armenians. And of course, this was given to them by Suleiman, what is called the Surbagov cemetery, was given to them by Sultan Suleiman, grateful for his Armenian cooking, and his personal loyalty to them. So I'm just throwing that out as an example how space itself, has a history, but it has a contested history. It's not an over history. Even though now it's the park. So, and this becomes significant later in terms of what kinds of possibilities are there with the revolutionary politics. You know, and how do you really appropriate that? And I think Sedef was very accurate in saying, do you want to articulate, going back and saying this was the Armenian cemetery, which reinserts a very identity politics, or do you want to take the history and re-articulate it in a different way that really opens up other connections with other people that are contesting and want to make claims to Istanbul? And I want to look at Istanbul because that expression of the movement there is much longer. I mean, because if we are going to think about Istanbul within its larger context, and I think Murat did a great presentation showing us, the space of Istanbul, but the space of Istanbul has different connections to urban areas, other urban areas, but also rural areas within Turkey itself. And also I want to stretch that to think of it, the geopolitical connections of the different spaces of Istanbul with different parts of the world, both in terms of Asia, and in terms of the Middle East itself, and the Americas as well, and for instance, I mean, some of the protesters were saying, the colonization has happened since 1453. And as, of course, I don't want to claim my identity here, but, part of that contestation there, it really points back to the empire formation. And I want to bring up this question of 1453 in Istanbul, or Istanbul history, marks, the colonization of, Constantinople. But in a way, I want to really challenge that as well, because it brings other, kind of imperial formations like Byzantium. But I want to say that basically, from the beginning, what we are seeing in Istanbul is a site of contestation of empire formation, both within the Middle Eastern context, but also the Americas. Because, what is the American formation is 1492, So, we have to think about it in terms of modernity projects, and thinking moving from local to global, connections in such a way that we cannot separate it any longer. So I think, Murat's point there is the connection of Istanbul, I mean, with different parts of the world, it raises a lot of questions about, questions of trade, the way that capital wants now at this particular moment to undiscipline itself. It wants to see everything and everybody in infinite ways and basically capture them. And then the other stuff that I think Yashin was bringing was the question of the working class, but also how the state itself has reformed itself, in the last few years specifically, especially with the financial crisis. Not that the state has gone away, but in order to bail out the bankers, and also, corporations themselves. So one of the industrialist construction and development were very significant projects. So when we think about Gezi, okay, a lot of people that came there were also protesting not only the undisciplined capital formation, which meant a lot of unemployment for people, the shopping mall, which meant, credit to some people and also, to the upper classes. But also it was contesting the fact that their land was being stolen from them, both in terms of Istanbul, but also agriculturally in rural areas. So here we're having other populations, and then I think Ezgin brought up extensively the question of reproduction, which had a lot to do with family formation. So a lot of women were there because they were contesting what was going on in terms of the new rules around reproduction question, but also what it meant for them to have an income, what it meant to feed their families. So here there is a question of spending up as well, who came to the Gezi Park. And I want to finish, by saying that what we have seen, and I think Sedef did a great job saying, what was really going here? What can we generalize? And I don't want to generalize, from what was happening in Istanbul, but I want to say that, for instance, what we have seen as expressions in Istanbul were already happening in northeastern Turkey with the militarization of that area and against the Kurds. So those kinds of protests did not begin with Gezi. I was there in 2008 talking to people, and a lot of people were already protesting, So we need to think of that trajectory as well. And for me, I think for us to think about a couple of questions that I really like Pelin's presentation, there are two things, and I'm going to reinsert Frantz Fanon here. What we have seen was that with Pelin's presentation, where the masks, you know, and also the gas and the water, you know, what do you call it? Yes, exactly, the cannons. So here what we are seeing politically is that the space of people is being stolen from them, you know, but not just the space with commodification, but also with the land reformation, and also like in terms of the industrialists themselves, people are losing even spaces of breathing space. You know, both in terms of public spaces, but also breathing and making claims to, you know, what they would like to see happening in terms of vision. So I will conclude with a couple of questions for us, which came out of the presentations. What is it that Gezi has brought to the fore? That we cannot really use, and I think Seraf did a great job with that, we cannot use the same language of revolution as previously. It has opened that to a question, what is revolution? And I began in the beginning, what is global? How do we understand global? You know, so that's the second question. And the third thing is, and I want to finish with that, is the subject formation. And what we have seen here is that identity politics have not really made connections with people, but has really segregated people in such ways that they were not able to make connective you know, articulations of visions. So Gezi part really revealed to us, you know, or has pointed to us that it's not possible any longer to segregate people, because they have come together. They were forced together, actually, because of neoliberal capital, but also because of the militarization that was really, I mean, a lot of the police there was preventing them from coming together. So in a way here, I want to say that Gezi has given us one important lesson, which is that people are forced because of the neoliberal agendas, but people are contesting them continually. You know, and they are contesting even, you know, in a Fanonian sense, even the way they breathe are not allowed. So Fanon says we have to combat, you know, with our breathing all the way, you know, all these colonizations or these neoliberal insertions, but finally, all basically the theft, you know, of where people can stand. And I think that Gezi has revealed that it's not possible any longer just to steal people's land without them fighting back with everything they have, including their breath. And I'm finished here.